Okay, as we continue our look at the wonderful biodiversity of the earth, we're now going to begin looking at eukaryotic organisms. And we're going to start with the single-celled or mostly single-celled organisms that we're collectively going to call the protists. Now, the word protist or protista is traditionally a kingdom-level taxon. However, a lot of emphasis being placed on new advances in biochemistry place organisms like that we're going to be looking at into maybe as many as 5 different kingdoms. So I don't really see the value in having you learn all of those different kingdom names. So we're just going to simply call them protists. And we're going to classify all unicellular or simple colonial eukaryotic organisms that are not fungi, plants, or animals as protists. Now, there's a huge amount of diversity in protists. And from an evolutionary aspect, protist diversity has its origins in something called endosymbiosis, which we're going to look at in just a moment. Endosymbiosis is this relationship between two species in which one organism lives within the cell or cells of another organism. And it's this endosymbiont theory that is thought to explain how complex eukaryotic cells evolved in the first place. Remember that one of the main differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells is the absence of a membrane-bound nucleus containing the genetic material and membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, chloroplast, etc. So if we look at these illustrations from your book, it's thought that our ancestral prokaryotic cell may have seen its genetic material enclosed by infolding of a plasma membrane. And this creation of our nuclear envelope ultimately led to the endoplasmic reticulum used as this factory to help build proteins. Now, as the ancestral eukaryotic cells began to diversify, we began to surmise that aerobic bacteria capable of aerobic respiration, were phagocytized, and therefore, but instead of being digested inside of the cell, they just simply began to reside there to produce energy. By the same token, it's thought that photosynthetic bacteria may have entered the cytoplasm in a similar fashion and ultimately became the chloroplasts. Now, when we look at protists and how they fit into the tree of life that we're going to be studying this semester, I don't want you to waste time learning all of these different names and memorizing this table. That's not what's important. What is important is that you see here in this eukaryotic tree of life is that we, animals, exist out here on this branch. And in fact, some of our closest relatives are fungi like mushrooms that we'll talk about at the end of this unit. While the major land plants that we're familiar with exist on a separate branch of the tree, fairly closely related to the various algae. And the one algae that we'll see that is probably closest related to the land plants are the chlorophytes or the green algae. So let's remind ourselves of some of the roles that these protists can have in our communities. Again, be sure you understand the different forms of symbiosis, mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism, because we're going to see these protists play a lot of these different roles as we look at them. Protists also can be producers in our ecosystems, and these producers we normally lump into this group called algae, but they may also be called phytoplankton. And so we begin to see our phytoplankton here that provide the carbon conversion for herbivorous plankton, and then ultimately carnivorous plankton, which feeds small fish, larger fish, and then some of our top consumers. Now, what I want to spend time doing is just look at many of the important protists that we find in the world around us. And again, this is not meant to be a complete survey, but we're just going to take a look at some examples. So first, is a protist called Giardia intestinalis. This organism causes something called giardiasis, which is also known as beaver fever. It is commonly found in areas where you have a lot of organic matter in the water, and if it finds its way into the mammal's intestines, it irritates the intestinal wall with a great degree, and it causes extremely painful and dangerous dysentery. You get this from drinking unclean water in mountain streams and so forth. You'll notice that Giardia intestinalis is shaped kind of like a heart, and it has lots of these little flagella around it.